actually like to hand over to Professor Deville. Professor Deville is an Honorary Professor for International Management at the University of Bayreuth. You are the member of the Korean-German Forum as well, and you're the president of the FL think tank in Munich. You have been an executive at Allianz, having studied mathematics and economics before. And we are very much looking forward to your presentation, to an introduction to different aspects of risk and risk management. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me try whether you can see my presentation. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I have now the task in 20 minutes or 25 minutes to explain from a global view all the risk humans and human societies can face. So let me try to do that. This is the overall picture on which types of risk we may face, and I will go through that once and then show you afterwards some examples, not all of them, to look into details. So on the left side, the natural risk. The first ones are tectonics, like earthquakes, volcanoes, or tsunamis. This is not a small risk. If you remember, 10 years ago, we had a tsunami in the Indian Ocean with more than 200,000 people dying. That is as much as in the corona pandemics. So that can be a big risk. The next ones are astronomic risks. Meteors or asteroids, if they come to the Earth, then it may be the end of our civilization, but happily that is a very, very rare event. Only some million years we need to have one of them in a sizable way. But solar storms electrons coming from our sun, they can disturb our power grids and they can even destroy power grids. So we have to make sure that our grids are safe against that. Meteorological risk and climate risks, I will come to that in some detail. Water, we can have enough, we can have too much or not enough. So drought and floods are big events, and it's not, if we look on Pakistan, we had some years ago a flooding covering 1/3 of the country for several months. So that type of events can happen with big damages. The biggest natural catastrophe we had last year was flooding in China. Biological risks, we have all the things like locusts or fungi or bacteria, not only affecting our animals, which we need and for eating or nutrition, but also for plants. And having locusts 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago in the Bible, suddenly they are there in East Africa again, causing famines and so on. The next category of risks are biometric risks. So we are used to accidental disability care parts. Epidemics, which is just written one word in health and epidemics, turned out last year to be a huge risk. I will come to that in some detail. But we have also risks on the demographic side, like low fertility, like longevity. Longevity does not seem to be a risk that you live too long. But if you do not have the financial means in old age to be old and to have a life and dignity and to pay, to have enough funds for paying health care bills, then that is a risk as well. Then on the economic side, we all know that poverty on a single basis, but also on a country basis, may be a big concern, and that can change the fate not only of a family or of a city, but of a whole country. Resource scarcity, we have food and water, but also rare minerals or other resources where we have not enough or which are not distributed in a way that we have easy access to that. recession and default of companies, but also of countries or of single families are other risks. I will go into some details on the financial crisis. Then we have risks coming from the fact that we live together and work together in towns and companies, and there we have property risks like fire, we have liability risks, but we have also new technologies in the digital area, but also in nanotechnology or medical technologies, which might cause new risk. Then environmental change, especially climate change, but there are more environmental changes on the way that we do as civilizations. We cause it, and then it will have effects back on the natural risk side with hurricanes or and so on. And then we have the bad guys, crime, terror, and war. And in the end, we have risks covering all these categories or are beyond those categories, like risk governance, like politics and regulations, or reputation. And we have seen on the highest political positions in the world that there might be risks as well. With that overview, I will just show us a few details. So on natural risks, last year, we had $210 billion losses globally. And thereof, more than a third, 82 billion, were insured. And the most severe events were the floods in China, I mentioned already, hurricanes in the North Atlantic, and US wildfires. If you look on hurricanes, on the bottom, there are two hurricanes mentioned, Katrina in New Orleans and Sandy, which went up to New York and flooded it. And we had huge losses within a few days. And even though we know about hurricanes, that they can come and that they have a huge power to destroy things, we are not always well prepared for that, as you can see on those losses. And if I go back, climate change is a effect, and it's a development where, thanks to COVID-19, we had a little break last year in the path, but nevertheless, it seems very unlikely from all the data we have up to now that we really can limit the temperature increase, the global temperature degrees to 2 degrees centigrade. So that is, like the politicians around the world now say as well, one of the real challenges, and we do not need to forget that after we fight this pandemics. Okay, then if we look on the biometric risks, and let's start with COVID-19. These are on a logarithmic scale, the people infected at the 20th of each month last year, as the World Health Organization provided the data. And you can see the trend, which seems to be linear from April to December, but since we have this exponential scale, that is still an exponential development. And if we see that it took only a few weeks from end of December last year up to March, when we declared the pandemics, and we knew that we are going to 1 million infected people, but that it went out of control. And now we are fighting not only with the mutations, but also to have vaccination in place very fast. But all we can see is that that will continue for some months to come. Now, if we look back on 2020, on that risk type, we had the 83 million cases, most of them US, India, Brazil, and also the deaths. We had a public lockdown on all of the different types of ways of life, but at different times, in different locations, with different duration, so, and with different types of supervision. So whether that was always good and effective is an open question. The same is true with the companies. Many had to run down their business and to close it, but they got help from all the governments around the world. But if we add up the help of governments, then we have around $7 trillion. So 7,000 billion, which is a very huge amount, much more than in the financial crisis. And the question, of course, is who will pay it back? It will be us, but how will we pay it back? Is it taxes? Will it be inflation? Will it be the next generation? So how do we handle that? We have to cope with that question in half a year when we have COVID-19 behind us. Already in June last year, we made a little study how the new normal of the world would look like after COVID-19 in 3 to 5 years. I won't go through that right now, but you can see that the question is open whether we just start again or whether we will start in a changed world. And obviously that will be the case. Another biometric risk is demography. This is the world population, the last 50 years and the next 50 years. And it will go up to more than 10 billion people, regardless of COVID-19. That will have a small impact on the large scale, global scale in 50 years' time. If you see the light blue bars at the bottom, that are the children up to 14 years, that is constant right now. That does not grow anymore. So the world population is only growing because we don't die early, but we live very long. And if you take the red ones, 80 and above, that will be up to 640 million people in 50 years' time. So what do we do with that? Or what do we do with you? Because you will be one of those people being in that age group. We have to restructure all our infrastructure in terms of living, in terms of care, in terms of health, in terms of old age financing, and that will be around the globe. There's another impact of demographic change, and that is that the countries and their impact will change over time. So 50 years ago, we had countries like Germany and Korea, like France and Japan being important big countries, and we lose population because all of these countries have very low fertility rates, so not enough babies per woman to sustain the development. And if we look 50 years ahead, those are UN statistical scenarios, then India will overtake China, Nigeria will overtake the US, and nobody speaks any longer from France or Germany or Korea or Japan because we are no longer on that list. Another, going to economic risk, labor is one thing which is underestimated sometimes. And there was a famous study from Frey Osborne, now already 8 years ago, where they estimated that 40% of global jobs will disappear. Well, they did it first for the US, but that it's 40% of jobs in advanced countries will disappear, 30% will change significantly, and only 30% will remain. And then we have to see, we have more home offices, we have new professions, we have older populations. So how does that change our world? And the answer is that we and you will not remain where you are in terms of skills, but that you have to change your skill set, not once in a life at university or after university, but every 5 years again, or maybe even more often. And this is a map for financial services, where a few years ago we looked on how managers in financial services need to change their learning and their way to work in financial services. And it's not only about the digital world, but it's about explaining it, explaining the digital world. Why does a computer send such a bad letter to an 80-year-old lady, and then she calls and you are sitting there and you must not only explain to the lady why she needs to pay more premium, but also why the computer was right and she's loving to do so. So not an easy task, up to understanding artificial intelligence and still remaining creative. Another topic on economic risk is the big financial crisis from 2007 that lasts until 2013, but 2007, 2008 were the big events. And it started with a housing crisis in the US, and then there were downgrades in several securities, and it spread it from the US all over the world. We had bank runs like Northern Rock Building Society in the United Kingdom, but it came also to the Euro area as well. And I would like to take a minute to take one thing out here in the number 6, Bear Stearns, and just to show you in detail how that happens if we have a financial crisis. So in early March 2008, we had Bear Stearns, one of the biggest global brokers in financial markets, 85 years old, $400 billion balance sheet. And their job was to take short-term funding, short-term money from other banks, and then to invest it in long-term projects and to get a profit out of the interest rate difference. They had low ethical reputation and had some problems with hedge funds where they were invested but outside the balance sheet, and small write-downs in the last quarters before. And then they changed in beginning of 2008 their CEO, their chief executive officer, and in early March there were some rumors that there are problems in another hedge fund where $1.7 billion were invested, so not very big in terms of the balance sheet, but there was no concise communication from Bear Stearns. Now, on March 10th, 2008, a Monday, they had in the morning $18.1 billion liquidity, cash on hand, cash in their accounts. So it was a very cash-rich company. And they exceeded all the risk capital criteria called Basel II for banks. So they had a strong balance sheet as well. And then that day, there was a downgrading of mortgage-backed securities issued by that bank, by a rating agency, and some rumors which were wrong about liquidity problems at Bear Stearns. You could see that they had 18 billion liquidity, so there were no liquidity problems. Then they asked the chairman, the CEO, who was in Florida that time playing golf, to come back to New York and to tell the press that they won't have problems. And then the CEO said, I will not come because then the people will think we have a problem. So he played in golf another day. But on Tuesday, all the other banks, they did not prolong their money, they withdraw their money. And although they tried to sell something, the liquidity funds went down. And on Wednesday, the CEO came back and said in the television, balance sheet not weakened at all. Well, but now liquidity became a problem, not the balance sheet. And the hedge fund with the rumors that collapsed. And then they sold whatever they could. Also on Thursday, when they started Thursday, they still had 3 billion of liquidity, but going down by 1 billion every hour. And at the end of the 4th day, they had to give up. They called for help, and then they went bankrupt, and the Federal Reserve went in, and JP Morgan, a strong bank at that time, and also today, they saved that. So a huge 85-year-old bank with $18 billion on cash could be destroyed in 4 days. So just remember that. Now, going to civilization risks, and we had many of those events in the financial crisis. So civilization risks, there are cyber and big data risks. You all know them very well. I will address artificial intelligence in a moment, but be aware that we have a lot of new technologies which may cause risks. If we have nano surface coating, nanoparticles, and in some cream for your skin, and suddenly you might have problems there. So we have to make sure that we understand new technologies. The same is true with autonomous cars and vehicles, which will come. Artificial intelligence is spreading much faster than we see it right now. For the time being, in military and technology, it's still the human who makes the final push on the button. So it's still we humans that we decide, but it is already possible, technically possible, to create artificial intelligences which are acting without human interference. And sometimes that might be good, but sometimes that might be risky. And we are far away from any governance to protect humans or to register artificial intelligence, or to see where in the military area or in the news area we might have artificial intelligence inside, not only as an opportunity, which clearly it is, but also as a risk. Now, if we leave those four categories and we look on overall risk things, this is the example of supply chain disruptions. If you look the supply for a factory from all over the world can be interrupted for several reasons. And these reasons are everywhere in all the different parts of the risk map. So to be aware of your risks is always a very broad item, also in these questions like supply chain. There are some meta risks, and let me just take the example of governance. What is governance? Wherever people live and work together, a common framework of values, rules, and procedures enables their success. And that is true for governments and for companies, but also on smaller entities wherever you look at. So this type of corporate governance was important and still is important, but we also need it for societal, for political systems, and for cyber systems as well. So governance is a meta risk which becomes more and more important because it's no longer as clear how to steer very complex risks otherwise. And here is the last one, answering the question about black swans and gray rhinos. So there are 5 examples of huge events where we knew the primary cause. So Sandy was a hurricane, we knew about that, and the same is true with longevity or COVID-19, that there are new viruses coming up that we knew. Then the immediate effect is normally also known. So if we have a new virus that we can get to a global pandemics, that we have known. And there have been enough models really to say how a global pandemic will develop. Those first models were 50 years old already. And so that was not really a surprise. And we had pandemic plans in most of the countries. And the same is true with hurricanes, and that there are storms and flooding, this we know. Now the question about which harm can make a rhino, or what does really mean to have a black swan, is that we have secondary effects, distant effects, which are unknown in terms of probability or impact. So that the Hurricane Sandy really flooded the New York underground and the power plants in New York, so that there is no transport and no electricity in some parts of New York for even 2 weeks. Nobody has imagined before. So that is something which was new. or that volcanoes in Iceland can erupt, and then we have ash clouds over Europe, and then the aircrafts cannot come from Bangkok to Munich with spare parts for BMW car production, so that a car factory needs to close down because the supply chain was not working anymore. Nobody knew before. So that was a new effect for learning. And the same was true, of course, in the financial crisis and in the Corona crisis, where we had a lot to learn. So with that, I will close, and I think if there are some very immediate questions about this risk fan, then you can ask it now, or otherwise we see the specific Korean case and we can discuss it together. So I hand back to Felix.